Welcome back, everyone. Ready to dive into another fascinating book? Today, we're tackling procrastination head-on and exploring how to unlock our potential.
Sounds exciting.
It is. We're taking a deep dive into Mel Robbins' The 5-Second Rule.
Oh, I've heard of that one. Isn't it about, like, counting down from 5 to get yourself to do things?
That's the basic idea, but there's a lot more to it than you might think. It's like a launch code for your goals.
I like that, a launch code. So what makes this book stand out from other self-help books?
Well, one of the things that really struck me is how Robbins blends personal stories, science, and even a bit of history to make your case.
Oh, that's interesting. It's not just about, like, positive affirmations and stuff.
No, it goes deeper than that.
Yeah,
It actually delves into the neuroscience of decision-making.
Neuroscience. Okay, now I'm intrigued.
Right, like it explains how fear and uncertainty can basically hijack our prefrontal cortex.
And that's the part of our brain responsible for, well, making decisions, right?
Right. Exactly. And the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 countdown acts as a sort of manual override, helping us bypass those automatic fear responses.
So it's not about, like, eliminating fear altogether. It's more about taking action before the fear has a chance to take over.
Precisely. Yeah. And you know what's really cool? It also ties into some fascinating research about how our brains actually react to goals.
Oh, how so?
Well, when we set a goal, our brains actually start scanning for opportunities to achieve it, even subconsciously.
Wow, really? So it's like our brains are constantly looking for ways to make those goals happen.
Exactly. Could that explain why sometimes when I'm trying to eat healthier, I walk right past the bakery without a second thought, but then I suddenly crave a salad when I pass a farmer's market?
That's a great example. It's like your brain is saying, hey, remember that goal you set? Here's your chance to actually do something about it.
That makes so much sense.
But these moments are often fleeting, and if we don't act quickly, doubt creeps in, and we end up, well, back on the couch scrolling through social media instead of going for that run.
All right, so that's where the 5-second rule comes in. Instead of getting stuck in that mental back and forth, we just 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and go for it.
Exactly. It's about interrupting that hesitation and just taking action. And it's not just about motivation either. The book argues that consistent action, even when it feels uncomfortable, builds genuine confidence over time.
Okay, so it's a way to kind of hack our confidence levels. I like that. But, even Mel Robbins herself, the author, struggled with this, right?
You're right. She's very open about her own battles with procrastination, especially when it came to writing the book itself.
That's kind of reassuring, actually. Like, even the expert on this stuff has moments of, I just don't feel like doing this right now.
Absolutely. But here's the thing. She makes a key distinction between destructive procrastination and productive procrastination.
Oh, I've never thought about it that way. So there are times when it's actually okay to, let things simmer a bit.
Right. Sometimes delaying a project, especially a creative one, can actually lead to better results. It gives your subconscious mind time to process and make new connections.
That makes sense. Like those aha moments you have in the shower when you've stepped away from actively trying to solve a problem.
Exactly. Think about it. Accidental discoveries and inventions like the match, Velcro, or even the Post-it note. These weren't exactly the results of strict schedules and to-do lists, were they?
True, true. But let's be honest, there's definitely a darker side to procrastination too, right?
Yes.
That feeling of being stuck in a cycle of guilt and missed deadlines. Ugh.
Yes. That's what we'd call destructive procrastination. And that's where the 5-second rule can become especially powerful. It's about interrupting those negative thought patterns and the excuses we often create to avoid taking action.
So how do we actually break free from that cycle? Like, what are some concrete steps?
Well, the book offers some really practical strategies. The first step is actually forgiveness.
Forgiveness, like
Wow.
forgiving ourselves for past procrastination.
Exactly. Letting go of any guilt or shame about it. Dwelling on it only keeps us stuck.
It's like that saying, you can't drive forward while looking in the rearview mirror. You have to focus on what's ahead.
Precisely. But how do we actually motivate ourselves to move forward, right?
Right, like once we've let go of that guilt, how do we actually get ourselves into gear?
Robbins suggests a really powerful exercise. Visualize your future self.
Oh, like imagine ourselves having already achieved our goals.
Yes. Ask yourself, what would that future version of you, the one who's already successful and happy, what would they do in this very moment?
That's a good one. So it's like tapping into the wisdom and motivation of our future selves.
Exactly. That can provide a lot of clarity and motivation. So, to recap, forgive yourself for past procrastination, visualize your awesome future self, and then when those feelings of procrastination creep back in,
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
you got it. It's about shifting gears from thinking to doing, but it's not always about starting big tasks or projects. The book also highlights how this rule can be applied to health and well-being, areas where our emotions often get in the way.
Oh, I can definitely relate to that. It's like we know we should eat healthy and exercise, but then, bam, cravings hit or fatigue sets in.
Exactly. And that's where the 5-second rule can be really helpful for that internal struggle.
Okay, I'm curious. How does it work in those situations?
It's about accepting that we might not always feel like doing what's good for us, but we can still choose to do it anyway. It's about separating action from feeling.
So instead of waiting for the motivation to strike, we just 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 and get ourselves to the gym or put down the donut.
You got it. Think of it as a mental override. And, the book is actually full of stories about people who have used the 5-second rule to achieve incredible health transformations.
Really? Like what? Give me an example.
There's one about a guy named Charlie who used it to commit to a daily juicing routine and ended up losing a significant amount of weight.
Wow, that's impressive. It's amazing how such a simple technique can have such a profound impact on people's lives.
It really is. And it's not just about physical health either. There's another story about a woman named Alice who used the 5-second rule to overcome anxiety and agoraphobia.
Wait, agoraphobia, that's the fear of open spaces or crowds, right?
Yes. She was practically housebound for a while.
Oh, wow. So she was actually able to leave her house again. That must have been incredibly difficult.
It was. It was a gradual process, but by breaking down her fear into smaller steps and using the 5-second rule to push past her anxiety, she was able to reclaim her life.
That's incredibly inspiring. These stories really highlight the power we have to make positive changes, even when it feels impossible. But what about applying this rule to our relationships? Sometimes it feels like the hardest things to do involve other people. You know what I mean?
You're absolutely right. It takes a lot of courage to have difficult conversations, to be vulnerable, and to really connect with others.
Right, like to say what we really feel or to set boundaries or to just reach out to someone we care about.
Exactly. But the 5-second rule can help us navigate those challenging moments.
It's like that extra push we sometimes need.
Exactly. And you know what? The book even shares a very personal story from Mel Robbins herself about using the 5-second rule to talk to her dad after he was diagnosed with a brain aneurysm.
Wow, I can't even imagine how difficult that must have been.
It was, but it was a conversation filled with really complex emotions. But using the 5-second rule allowed them to connect on a deeper level and share their feelings openly and honestly.
That's incredibly moving. So it's not just about achieving our own goals. It's also about having the courage to build stronger, more meaningful relationships. Wow, I feel like we barely scratched the surface of this book, but it's definitely given me a lot to think about.
It really makes you reevaluate how you approach relationships, doesn't it? And it goes even deeper than that. The book explores how the 5-second rule can actually shift our entire mindset around confidence.
That's something I've always struggled with, to be honest. I tend to wait until I feel confident before taking action, which, well, often means I end up not doing much of anything at all.
That's a really common misconception, actually. We think confidence is something you either have or you don't, but the 5-second rule challenges that idea completely.
Oh, okay. I'm listening.
It argues that confidence is actually built through action.
That's interesting. It's kind of like that classic fake it till you make it idea, but with a more, I don't know, scientific backing.
Exactly. And it's actually connected to something called self-perception theory.
Okay, I'm not familiar with that one. Tell me more.
Basically, we infer our own attitudes and beliefs based on our actions. So if we act courageously, even if we don't feel confident at first, our brain starts to think, hey, maybe I am braver than I thought.
Oh, that makes sense. So it's not about suppressing our doubts or anxieties. It's about taking action despite them.
Exactly. There's actually a great story in the book that illustrates this perfectly. Mel Robbins was at a tech conference, and she challenged a group of engineers to use the 5-second rule to introduce themselves to 3 strangers each day.
Oh, wow. I can only imagine how nerve-wracking that must have been for some of them. Engineers aren't exactly known for being the most outgoing bunch, are they?
Probably not. I'm sure it was outside a lot of their comfort zones.
Yeah.
But the feedback she got was incredible. So many of them told her they felt this huge surge of pride and accomplishment after doing it. It wasn't about becoming extroverts overnight. It was about proving to themselves they could do something that felt really difficult.
That's a great point. So by taking action, even in small ways, we can start to shift how we see ourselves and build genuine confidence. It's not about waiting until we feel ready. It's about taking those 5-second leaps of faith.
Absolutely. But the book also acknowledges that going after our passions and achieving our big goals, it can be daunting, even with the 5-second rule. Sometimes we need a little extra support along the way.
Yeah, for sure. Like maybe finding mentors or surrounding ourselves with a supportive community.
Exactly. The book emphasizes how important it is to have people around us who believe in us and encourage us, especially when things get tough. There's so much power in having a team behind you.
Like that saying, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together.
Right. But even with all the support in the world, sometimes the sheer scale of our dreams can just feel overwhelming.
Oh, for sure. It can be paralyzing sometimes.
That's why the 5-second rule really encourages us to break down our big goals into smaller, more manageable steps. Instead of focusing on the huge end goal that feels miles away, identify those small actions we can take each day to get a little bit closer.
So it's like creating a series of mini launches, each powered by the 5-second rule, that will eventually propel you to your ultimate destination.
Exactly. And you know what? Sometimes those mini launches might even take us down unexpected paths, which is okay. The book reminds us to be open to exploring new possibilities, even if they don't seem directly related to our goals at the time.
It's about following our curiosity and seeing where it leads us.
Yes. There's this great story in the book about a woman named Jo. She was working as a banker, but on a whim, she decided to take a gemology class, just out of personal interest.
Oh, wow. What happened? Did she end up quitting her job and becoming a jewelry designer?
Well, not quite that dramatically, at least not right away. But that class ended up sparking a passion in her that she never knew she had. And eventually, she did leave her banking job to start her own jewelry business. It all started with that one decision to just follow her curiosity.
Wow, that's so inspiring. It shows how those small actions, even those fueled just by curiosity, can have such a ripple effect. But I imagine following our passions isn't always easy, especially if they clash with our family's expectations for us.
That's definitely a tricky situation to navigate. But the book makes a strong argument that living authentically, even if it means having some tough conversations, is ultimately way more fulfilling than sacrificing our dreams just to please other people.
Makes sense. I think there's actually a story in the book that touches on this, right? Something about a guy named Todd who was dealing with his family's expectations.
Yes. His parents really wanted him to pursue a traditional professional degree, something like law or business.
Oh, I know that pressure. A lot of families push for those paths.
Right. But Todd, his heart was totally set on something else, physical education.
Wow, that's a pretty big difference in expectations. Was he able to overcome that conflict?
It sounds like it was tough, but he ultimately realized that living a life true to himself was way more important than meeting his family's expectations. And the 5-second rule, it actually gave him the courage to finally act.
How so? What did he do?
He literally walked out of an advanced taxation law class in the middle of the lecture. He unenrolled from the university and then enrolled himself in a completely different school where he could pursue his passion for physical education.
Wow, that's an incredible act of courage and self-discovery. It really highlights how this rule can be a tool for finding your own voice and having the courage to go after what truly matters to you, even if it means having those difficult conversations.
Exactly. And it's a great example of how those small acts of courage can lead to really incredible personal growth and transformation.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But sometimes I feel like the biggest obstacle isn't even other people. It's that voice inside my own head. That inner critic that tells me I'm not good enough or smart enough or brave enough.
Oh, the inner critic. We've all been there. The 5-second rule actually dedicates a whole section to tackling those negative thought patterns, anxieties, and fears.
Oh, good. I was hoping we'd get to that.
Ah,
I definitely need some help in that department.
don't we all?
Yeah.
But one of the first steps, and this might sound obvious, is just recognizing that our thoughts aren't always accurate reflections of reality.
Right. Like just because I think something doesn't mean it's true.
Exactly. Our thoughts are often influenced by all sorts of things. Past experiences, limiting beliefs we've picked up along the way, or even just having a bad day.
So it's not about ignoring those negative thoughts completely. It's more about questioning them.
Exactly. The book encourages us to challenge those thoughts and ask ourselves, is this really true? Is there another way to look at this situation?
So it's like we're putting those thoughts on trial instead of just letting them run rampant in our minds. I like that.
Right. And that's where the 5-second rule can be a really powerful tool for interrupting that whole spiral of negative thinking. Instead of getting all caught up in those thoughts, use that countdown as a way to shift your focus to something more positive.
Okay, I see what you mean. But how do we actually do that? It's easier said than done to just shift our focus, isn't it?
The book talks about using anchoring thoughts. These are positive phrases or images that you can focus on whenever anxiety starts to creep in.
So it's like creating a mental go-to button for those moments.
Exactly. It gives your brain something positive to latch onto, and it helps to counteract those negative thought patterns. For example, if you're feeling really anxious about giving a presentation, your anchoring thought could be something like, I'm prepared, I've got this.
Okay, that makes sense. But what about when anxiety isn't just mental? Like, what about things like panic attacks? When it manifests physically, can the 5-second rule help with that too?
Panic attacks can be absolutely terrifying, but it's important to remember that they're basically a false alarm in our nervous system. Our body is reacting as if there's a real threat, even though there might not be.
Right, like our fight or flight response is going haywire even though we're not actually in danger.
Exactly. And in those moments, deep breathing, mindfulness, and grounding techniques, those can be really effective in calming our nervous system down.
And the 5-second rule can help us implement those techniques more quickly, right? Like, instead of getting swept away by the fear and panic, we can use the countdown to interrupt it and take control.
Precisely. It's about retraining our brains to respond differently to those triggers.
So the 5-second rule isn't a magic cure-all, but it's more like a mental tool that can help us manage those really overwhelming emotions and take back control. But what about fears that are more, I don't know, deeply rooted, like phobias that we've had for years? Can it help with those as well?
The book actually has some amazing stories about people using the 5-second rule to overcome fears and phobias they've had for a long time. Even Mel Robbins herself writes about struggling with a fear of flying.
Really? Even the person who wrote the book about taking action has a fear of flying. That makes me feel a little better about my own anxieties, to be honest.
It just goes to show that we're all human, right? But anyway, she developed a whole strategy for dealing with it, using anchoring thoughts, focusing on the positive aspects of her destination, and even just reminding herself that, hey, if she's there enjoying the experience, it means the plane didn't crash.
That's kind of funny. It's like flipping the script on the fear and focusing on the positive outcome instead.
So,
Yeah.
did it work? It seems so. And the key takeaway, I think, is that overcoming fear isn't about becoming fearless. It's about learning how to manage those fears so they don't control our lives.
It's about taking those 5-second leaps of faith, even when our brains are screaming at us not to. Well, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive already, from the science behind the 5-second rule to its practical applications. We've talked about overcoming procrastination, building confidence, pursuing our passions, and managing our anxieties. It feels like we've only scratched the surface, but this has given me a lot to think about.
Me too. It really is a fascinating approach to personal growth and development, isn't it? And it's all based on this incredibly simple yet powerful technique.
And you know what's really cool? One of the main themes that keeps coming up is the idea of living a life without regrets. I think that's such a powerful message.
It really is. The book encourages us to think about what we might regret not doing and then use the 5-second rule to actually go after those things.
So it's not just about checking things off our to-do list. It's about making choices that align with our values and priorities.
Exactly. It's about being proactive and creating the life we want, rather than letting fear hold us back and dictate our choices.
You know, the book has this really poignant story that perfectly illustrates this point. It's the one where Mel Robbins talks about her dad being diagnosed with a brain aneurysm.
Oh, yes. That's such a powerful story. It's such a great example of how important it is to seize the moment and have those difficult conversations, even when it feels scary.
I remember feeling really emotional reading that part. She describes how she initially hesitated to ask her dad if he was scared about the surgery, but then she used the 5-second rule to push past her own discomfort.
And it ended up being such a meaningful conversation for both of them. Her dad shared his whole perspective on facing mortality and living a life without regrets.
Yeah, he even talked about his dream of going skydiving on his 90th birthday. It's such a beautiful reminder that life is precious, and we shouldn't take our time with loved ones for granted.
It's about making the most of every moment and expressing how we feel while we still have the chance.
It definitely made me rethink how I approach conversations with my own family. Sometimes those deeper heart-to-heart talks are the ones we remember the most, aren't they?
Absolutely. And the book doesn't just focus on those tough conversations. It also highlights how the 5-second rule can be used to actually mend broken relationships. There's a story about a woman named Courtney who used it to reconnect with her father after years of being estranged.
It's amazing to me how such a simple technique can help people overcome such deeply ingrained patterns and behaviors.
It's a powerful reminder that it's never too late to reach out, to forgive, and to try to rebuild those connections that matter most.
It's about taking that first step, even when it feels awkward or uncertain.
Exactly. And, you know, those acts of courage, they can create this ripple effect and inspire others to do the same.
I love that. So the 5-second rule, it's not just about individual personal growth. It's also about contributing to a more connected and compassionate world.
It's about empowering ourselves and others to live more authentic and fulfilling lives.
Well, I think we've covered just about every facet of the 5-second rule in this deep dive. We've talked about the science behind it, explored the practical applications, shared some inspiring stories, and really delved into the whole message of living a life without regrets.
It's been a pretty fascinating journey, and I really hope our listeners feel inspired to try using this technique in their own lives.
Oh, I know I do. But before we wrap up, I want to leave everyone with one final thought to ponder. What's that one thing you've been putting off? That dream you've been hesitant to chase? That conversation you've been avoiding? That change you've been longing to make?
Don't let fear hold you back any longer. You have the power to take control, starting right now.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Go do it. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the 5-second rule. Until next time, keep pushing yourselves and keep diving deep.
It really makes you reevaluate how you approach relationships, huh? And the book, it goes even deeper than that. It explores how the 5-second rule can actually change how we think about confidence.
Ooh, that's a good one. Confidence is something I think a lot of us struggle with.
Oh, for sure.
I know I do. I tend to wait till I feel confident before I do anything.
Yeah.
Which honestly means I don't get much done.
I get it. It's a common trap. We think, oh, confidence, I either have it or I don't. But the 5-second rule, it flips that whole idea on its head.
Okay, how so?
It argues that we build confidence through action, not the other way around.
So it's like instead of waiting to feel confident before we do something, we just do it, even if we're scared.
Exactly. It's like that old saying, fake it till you make it, but with some science behind it.
Okay, I like where this is going. What's the science there?
Well, it has to do with something called self-perception theory. Basically, the idea is that we figure out our own attitudes and beliefs based on how we act.
That's interesting.
So let's say even if we don't feel confident, if we act courageously, our brain kind of goes, hold on, maybe I am more confident than I thought.
So our actions can actually change how we see ourselves.
Yes. There's a great story in the book that illustrates this perfectly. Mel Robbins, she was at this tech conference, and she challenged this group of engineers, you know, not exactly known for being the life of the party,
Yeah, no,
to
exactly.
use the 5-second rule to introduce themselves to 3 new people each day.
Oh, wow. That must have been way outside their comfort zones for some of them.
Big time. But you know what? The feedback she got was incredible. So many of them said they felt this, like, surge of pride and accomplishment after doing it.
It wasn't about suddenly becoming these super social butterflies.
Right, exactly.
It was more about proving to themselves that they could do something that felt hard.
Exactly.
I like that.
So yeah, even taking small actions can change how we see ourselves and help build real confidence. It's about taking those leaps of faith, those 5-second decisions to just do it.
I love that. But, you know, it's one thing to push ourselves, but going after big dreams and goals, that can still be daunting.
It can. And the book acknowledges that. It says even with the 5-second rule, sometimes we need a little backup.
Right. Like having good mentors or surrounding ourselves with supportive friends and family.
Exactly. It emphasizes the importance of having those people around us who believe in us and who are there to cheer us on, especially when things get tough.
It really does make a
It's a
difference.
huge difference. Like they say, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together.
So true. But even with a good support system, sometimes the size of our dreams can just feel, I don't know, overwhelming.
Oh, absolutely. That's why the book is all about breaking those big goals down into smaller, more manageable steps. Instead of focusing on the huge end goal way off in the distance, it says, think about the little things you can do today, right now, to get closer to it.
So instead of one giant scary launch, it's like a series of smaller 5-second powered launches that eventually get you where you want to be.
Exactly. And sometimes those smaller steps might take you down some unexpected paths, which can be a good thing. You know, the book really encourages us to be open to new possibilities, even if they don't seem directly related to what we think our goals are right now.
It's like follow your curiosity and see what happens.
Exactly. It reminds me of the story in the book about a woman, Jo. She worked as a banker, right? But then one day she decided to take this gemology class.
Ooh, gemology. That's the study of gemstones, right?
Yeah. And she did it just because she was curious, nothing more.
So what happened? Did she suddenly quit her job and become a jewelry designer?
Well, she didn't do it overnight.
Okay.
But that class, it sparked something in her, a passion she didn't even know she had. And you know what? Eventually, she did leave her banking job and start her own jewelry business, all because she decided to follow her curiosity.
I love that story. It's so inspiring. It shows how even the smallest actions, things we do just because we're curious, can lead to these huge changes.
They can, but following our passions isn't always easy, especially if, like, our family has different expectations for us.
Oh, yeah, that could be tough. Like when our dreams clash with what our parents want for us.
Exactly. But the book argues that living a life that feels authentic to you, even if it means having some uncomfortable conversations, is way more fulfilling than living someone else's dream.
Right. It's about being true to yourself.
Yeah.
Even if it's hard. I think there's a story in the book about that, isn't there? Something about a guy named Todd who was dealing with that kind of family pressure.
You got it. Todd's parents, they really wanted him to go for one of those traditional professional degrees, law, business, something like that.
The classic path.
Right. But Todd, he had a totally different passion. Physical education.
Wow. Okay. That's a big difference in expectations.
Yeah.
So what happened? Was he able to follow his own path?
He did. It sounds like it was a tough process, a lot of soul searching. But he realized that living a life true to himself, that was what mattered most. And you know what helped him make that decision?
The 5-second rule.
You got it. It gave him the courage to act. He literally got up and walked out of an advanced taxation law class right in the middle of a lecture, unenrolled from that university, and then went and enrolled in a completely different school where he could study what he really loved.
Wow. That's incredible. Talk about a powerful example of self-discovery. And it shows how this rule can be more than just like a productivity hack.
Totally.
It can be this tool for like finding your voice and having the courage to do what's right for you, even if it's hard.
100%. It shows that even the toughest conversations, they can lead to huge personal growth.
They can.
Hmm.
But sometimes the toughest critic isn't our family or friends. It's that voice inside our own heads. You know what I mean? That inner critic that tells us we're not good enough or brave enough.
Oh, the inner critic. Don't get me started. We all have one lurking in the shadows.
I know, right?
And, the book has a whole section on dealing with those negative thoughts and fears.
Good, because I definitely need help with that. So what's the secret? How do we silence that inner critic?
Well, the first step, and this might sound obvious, is to realize that those thoughts, they're not always true.
Right. Just because we think something doesn't make it a fact.
Exactly. Our thoughts are often colored by things that have happened in the past or beliefs we picked up along the way, or even just, like, having a bad day.
So it's about challenging those thoughts and not just accepting them as truth.
Yes. The book encourages us to ask ourselves, is this really true? Is there a different way to see this?
It's like putting those thoughts on trial instead of letting them run the show in our heads.
Exactly. And you know what? That's where the 5-second rule can be so helpful. Instead of getting stuck in those negative thought loops, use that countdown to shift your focus to something positive.
Okay, I get that.
Okay.
But shifting our focus, it's easier said than done, right? Like, how do we actually do that when those negative thoughts start creeping in?
The book talks about using what it calls anchoring thoughts. Those are positive phrases or images that you can focus on when things get tough.
So it's like creating a mental go-to button to press whenever those negative thoughts start taking over.
Exactly. You give your brain something positive to grab onto. It helps to counteract the negativity. Let's say you're about to give a big presentation and you're super nervous. Your anchoring thought could be something like, I'm prepared, I got this.
Okay, that makes sense. But what about when anxiety isn't just mental? Like when it's a panic attack and your whole body feels like it's freaking out. Can the 5-second rule help with those too?
Panic attacks are tough, but they're essentially our nervous system misfiring. Our body thinks we're in danger when we're not.
Right, like our fight or flight response goes off even though we're not actually facing a threat.
Right. So the book talks about how important it is to use things like deep breathing, mindfulness, and grounding techniques. Those can really help to calm the nervous system down.
And the 5-second rule can help us remember to use those techniques more quickly, right? Like instead of getting caught up in the panic, we can use the countdown to interrupt it and take control.
Exactly. It's about retraining our brains to respond differently.
So the 5-second rule isn't like a magic pill. It's more like a mental tool that we can use to manage those really overwhelming emotions and take back control. But what about those deeper fears, like phobias that we've had for years and years? Can it help with those too?
It can. The book has all these stories about people using the 5-second rule to overcome those deep-seated fears. And even Mel Robbins herself, she talks about her own struggles with the fear of flying.
Wait, really? The woman who wrote the book about taking action is afraid of flying.
She is. It just goes to show that none of us are immune to fear. But she figured out a way to manage it. She used anchoring thoughts, focused on the positive aspects of her destination, and even reminded herself that if she's able to enjoy the trip, it means the plane didn't crash.
That's a good one. So it's about flipping the script on the fear and focusing on the positive outcome. Did it work?
It did. And the key takeaway, I think, is that overcoming fear isn't about never feeling afraid again. It's about learning to manage those feelings so they don't control our lives.
It's about taking those 5-second leaps of faith, even when it's scary. Well, we've definitely covered a lot in this deep dive. We've gone from the science behind the 5-second rule to all sorts of ways to apply it, overcoming procrastination, building confidence, going after our dreams, dealing with anxiety. I feel like we've only scratched the surface, but this has given me so much to think about.
Me too. It's amazing how much power there is in such a simple technique.
It really is. And one of the things that keeps coming back to me is this theme of living a life without regrets. I think that's such a powerful message.
It is. The book encourages us to ask ourselves, what will I regret not doing? And then use the 5-second rule to actually go after those things.
So it's not just about, being productive or achieving our goals. It's about making choices that truly matter to us.
Exactly. It's about actively creating the life we want instead of letting fear make decisions for us.
There's a really moving story in the book that really illustrates this point. It's the one where Mel Robbins talks about her dad being diagnosed with a brain aneurysm.
Oh, yeah. That one always gets me. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes the scariest conversations are the ones we need to have the most.
I remember getting teary-eyed reading that part. She talks about how she was so hesitant to ask her dad if he was scared about the surgery. But then she used the 5-second rule to push past her discomfort and just ask.
And it was such a powerful moment for both of them. Her dad opened up about how he felt about facing his own mortality, about living a life without regrets.
He even told her about his dream of going skydiving when he turned 90. It's a beautiful reminder that life is short, and we shouldn't take the people we love for granted.
Absolutely. It's about making the most of every moment, saying the things we need to say while we still can.
It really makes you think about how you approach those conversations with the people you care about. Sometimes those deeper heart-to-heart talks are the ones we remember the most, aren't they?
For sure. And the book goes beyond just having difficult conversations. It even talks about how the 5-second rule can help heal broken relationships. There's a story about a woman named Courtney who used it to reconnect with her father after they'd been estranged for years.
It's amazing to me how this one simple technique can help people shift those deeply ingrained patterns.
It's a powerful reminder that it's never too late to reach out, to forgive, and to try to rebuild those connections.
About having the courage to take that first step, even when it feels awkward or scary.
It is. And you know what? Those acts of courage, they can inspire others to do the same. It creates this ripple effect of positivity.
So the 5-second rule, it's not just about improving ourselves, it's about helping to create a more connected and compassionate world.
Exactly. It's about empowering ourselves and others to live those authentic, fulfilling lives that we all dream of.
Well, I think we've covered just about everything there is to cover about the 5-second rule in this deep dive. We've talked about the science, the practical tips, the inspiring stories, and the overall message of living without regrets. It's been quite a journey.
It has. And I really hope it inspires our listeners to give this technique a try in their own lives.
I know I'm definitely going to be using it. But before we wrap up, I want to leave everyone with one final thought. What's that one thing you've been putting off? That dream you've been hesitant to chase, that conversation you've been avoiding, that change you've been wanting to make.
Don't let fear call the shots anymore. You have the power to take control right here, right now.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go do it. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the 5-second rule. Until next time, keep pushing yourselves and keep diving deep. It really makes you think about those conversations, doesn't it? And the book. It goes even deeper, exploring how the 5-second rule can actually shift how we view confidence.
It really does. You know, a lot of people think confidence is something you're just born with. You either have it or you don't.
Yeah, I've always kind of felt that way.
But the 5-second rule challenges that idea. It says confidence is built through action.
So instead of waiting to feel confident before doing something, we should just do it. even if we're terrified.
Exactly. It's like that fake it till you make it idea, but with more, I don't know, scientific backing.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What's the science behind it?
Well, it's connected to something called self-perception theory.
Never heard of that.
Basically, we figure out our own beliefs and attitudes from our actions. So if we act courageously, even when we don't feel confident, our brain starts to think, maybe I am braver than I thought.
So our actions can actually change how we see ourselves.
Yes. The book tells this great story. Mel Robbins was at a tech conference, and she challenged a bunch of engineers, not exactly known for being the most outgoing folks,
Yeah, not really.
to use the 5-second rule to introduce themselves to 3 new people each day.
Oh, wow. I bet that was pretty tough for some of them.
I'm sure it was. But the feedback was amazing. So many of them said they felt this huge surge of pride and accomplishment afterwards.
It wasn't about becoming like the life of the party overnight.
No.
It was about proving to themselves that they could do something that felt really hard.
Exactly. So even taking those small steps can have a big impact on our confidence. It's all about taking those leaps of faith, those 5-second decisions, to just go for it.
I love that.
Yeah.
But, pushing ourselves is one thing. Going after big dreams and goals, that can still be pretty daunting.
It can, and the book gets that. It says even with the 5-second rule, sometimes we need a little extra support.
Right, like finding good mentors or building a supportive community around ourselves.
Exactly. It talks about how important it is to have those people in your corner, the
Right.
ones who believe in you, who can cheer you on, especially when things get tough.
Like they say, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together.
Right. But even with all the support in the world, sometimes those big dreams can just feel, I don't know, so overwhelming.
Oh, yeah, it can be paralyzing.
That's why the book says to break those big goals down into smaller steps. Instead of focusing on the huge end goal that feels miles away, focus on the little things you can do today, right now, to get a little closer.
So instead of one giant scary launch, it's more like a series of smaller 5-second powered launches that add up over time.
Exactly. And you know what? Sometimes those smaller steps can lead us down unexpected paths, which can be a really good thing. The book encourages us to be open to those new possibilities, even if they don't seem related to what we think our goals are right now.
It's about following our curiosity and seeing where it takes us.
Yes. Like in the book, there's this story about a woman, Jo. She was working as a banker, but then, just out of curiosity, she decided to take this gemology class.
Gemology, that's the study of gemstones. Right?
Yep. And she took it just because she was curious.
So what happened? Did she quit her job and become a jewelry designer?
Well, not right away. But that class, it sparked this passion she didn't even know she had. Eventually, she did leave banking and start her own jewelry business, all because she followed her curiosity.
I love that. It shows how even the smallest actions, things we do just because we're interested, can lead to such huge changes in our lives.
They can, but sometimes following our passions isn't so easy, especially if our family has different expectations.
Oh, yeah. It can be tough when our dreams clash with what our parents want for us.
It is. But the book argues that living a life that feels authentic to you, even if it means having some tough conversations, is so much more fulfilling than living someone else's dream.
It's about being true to yourself. There's a story about this in the book, right?
Yeah.
About a guy named Todd dealing with that kind of family pressure.
That's right. His parents, they really wanted him to pursue one of those classic professional degrees, law, business, that sort of thing.
Yeah, the classic path.
But Todd had a totally different passion, physical education.
Wow, that's a big difference in expectations. Did he end up following his own path?
He did. It wasn't easy, but he realized that being true to himself was what really mattered. And you know what helped him make that decision?
The 5-second rule.
You got it. It gave him the courage to act. He literally walked out of an advanced taxation law class, right in the middle of it, unenrolled from that university, and went to a totally different school where he could study what he loved.
That's incredible. Talk about a powerful example of self-discovery. And it shows that even the toughest conversations can lead to amazing personal growth.
They can. But you know what? Sometimes the toughest critic isn't our family or friends. It's that voice inside our own heads.
Oh, I know exactly what you mean. That inner critic that tells us we're not good enough, not smart enough, not brave enough.
The inner critic. It's like it's always lurking in the shadows, waiting to bring us down.
I know. So how do we deal with that? How do we silence that inner critic?
Well, the first step, and this might sound super basic, is to realize that those thoughts, those criticisms, they're not always true.
Just because we think something doesn't make it a fact.
Exactly. Our thoughts are often shaped by things from our past, beliefs we've picked up along the way, or even just having a bad day.
So it's about challenging those negative thoughts instead of just accepting them as the truth.
Yes. The book encourages us to ask ourselves, is this really true? Is there a different way to look at this situation?
It's like putting those thoughts on trial instead of letting them control our lives.
Right. And that's where the 5-second rule can come in handy. Instead of getting stuck in those negative thought loops, we can use the countdown to shift our focus to something more positive.
Okay, I get that. But shifting our focus like that, that's easier said than done. How do we actually do that when those negative thoughts just keep popping up?
The book talks about creating what it calls anchoring thoughts.
Anchoring thoughts.
Yeah, those are positive phrases or images you can focus on whenever those negative thoughts and anxiety start creeping in.
So it's like having this mental go-to button you can press when things get tough.
Exactly. It gives your brain something positive to latch onto, something to counteract those negative thoughts. So let's say you're about to give a presentation and you're super nervous. Your anchoring thought could be something like, I am prepared. I've got this.
Okay, that makes sense. But what about when anxiety is more than just a thought? Like when it's a full-blown panic attack?
Panic attacks can be really scary. It's basically our nervous system going haywire, thinking we're in danger even when we're not.
Yeah, like our fight or flight response going off for no reason.
Right. The book talks about how deep breathing, mindfulness, and grounding techniques can be super helpful in those moments.
They can help calm down our nervous system. And the 5-second rule can help us remember to use those techniques more quickly, right? Like instead of getting totally swept up in the panic, we can use the countdown to interrupt it and take control.
Exactly. It's about retraining our brains to respond differently to those triggers.
So the 5-second rule, it's not like some magic cure-all. It's more like a tool we can use to manage those really overwhelming emotions. But what about fears that are more, I don't know, deep-seated, like phobias we've had for years? Can it help with those too?
Absolutely. There are all these stories in the book about people using it to overcome those long-held fears. Even Mel Robbins herself, she writes about struggling with a fear of flying.
Really, the woman who wrote the book about taking action is afraid of flying.
She is. It just goes to show that we're all human, we all have fears. But she found ways to manage it. She used anchoring thoughts, focused on the positive parts of her destination, and even reminded herself that, hey, if she's there and enjoying herself, it means the plane didn't crash.
It's like turning the fear on its head and focusing on the positive. So did it work?
It did. And I think the key takeaway there is that overcoming fear isn't about never feeling afraid again. It's about learning how to handle it so it doesn't control our lives.
It's about taking those 5-second leaps of faith, even when it feels scary. Well, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. We talked about the science, the practical tips, the inspiring stories. It feels like we've only scratched the surface, but it's definitely given me a lot to think about.
Me too. It's amazing how much power there is in such a simple technique.
It really is. And, one of the things that keeps sticking with me is this whole idea of living a life without regrets.
Yeah, that's a powerful message. The book encourages us to ask ourselves, what will I regret not doing? And then use the 5-second rule to actually go after those things.
So it's not just about productivity or checking things off a list. It's about making choices that truly matter to us.
Exactly. It's about taking control and creating the life we want, not letting fear make decisions for us.
The book has this really poignant story about this, the one where Mel Robbins talks about her dad being diagnosed with a brain aneurysm.
Oh, yeah. That one really gets to me. It's such a good reminder that sometimes the scariest conversations are the most important ones to have.
I remember getting a little choked up reading that part. She was so hesitant to ask her dad if he was scared about the surgery. But then she used the 5-second rule to just push past her discomfort and ask him.
And it turned out to be this incredibly meaningful moment for both of them. Her dad opened up about his feelings, about facing his mortality, about living a life without regrets.
He even told her about his dream of going skydiving on his 90th birthday. It's a beautiful reminder that life is precious and we shouldn't take anything for granted.
Absolutely. It's about making the most of each moment, about saying the things that matter while we have the chance.
It really does make you think about those conversations with your loved ones, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Sometimes those deeper heart-to-heart talks are the ones we remember the most.
For sure. And the book doesn't just focus on those tough conversations. It also talks about how we can use the 5-second rule to heal broken relationships. There's a story about a woman named Courtney who used it to reconnect with her dad after years of estrangement.
It's amazing to me how this simple technique can help people overcome such deep-seated patterns and behaviors.
It is. It's a reminder that it's never too late to reach out, to forgive, and to try to rebuild those connections that matter to us.
It's about having the courage to take that first step, even if it feels awkward or uncertain.
Exactly. And those acts of courage can be so inspiring. They can even inspire others to do the same.
So it's not just about improving ourselves, it's about making the world a little bit better, a little more connected and compassionate.
It's about empowering ourselves and others to live those authentic, fulfilling lives that we all dream about.
Well, I think we've covered just about every angle of the 5-second rule in this deep dive. We've explored the science behind it, all the practical tips, and the inspiring stories. The overall message of living a life without regrets really resonated with me.
Me too. And I really hope our listeners feel inspired to give the 5-second rule a try. It could change their lives.
I think it could. But before we go, I want to leave everyone with one final thought. What's that one thing you've been putting off? That dream you've been too scared to chase? That conversation you've been avoiding? That change you've been wanting to make but haven't? Don't let fear hold you back any longer.
You have the power to change. Right here, right now. Take control.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Go do it. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the 5-second rule. Until next time, keep pushing yourselves and keep diving deep.